For many years on Christmas Eve, I would tell the story of Christmas, of that first Christmas through the eyes of one of the characters. So many times it's one of the minor characters, um, and I try to come up with a perspective of somebody who was living in the first century and how they would have understood the events surrounding what we know of as that first Christmas. And so I'd like to do that this Advent series with you, or sorry, this Advent season with you. And so next on Digging Deeper, I want to look with you at a servant's story. Looking back, I had absolutely no way of knowing how special the day would be that I heard about the baby. So we call it the baby. I had no way of knowing that my life would be changed forever. It all began many years ago. My family had been in service to the Hasmonean rulers, and they had been in service to those rulers for generations. In fact, we began with the greatest of the Hasmonean kings, John Hyrcanus. He was the priest king who was able to finally bring peace to the nation of Israel after the rebellion that became known as the Maccabean revolt, and ushered in what we call the Hasmonean dynasty. Now, the Hasmoneans were not perfect. I'm never going to say that they were, but they were Jewish. And after being ruled by Babylonians and Persians and Greeks and Syrians, we were proud to finally have a Jewish king back on the throne. And my family entered into service. Now, we were not political. We only asked to serve the reigning monarch and to serve our nation. That's all we wanted to do. And things seemed to go fairly well until it came to the point where the ruling children couldn't get along in the sandbox and they began to fight. Now, I won't go into detail, but I can tell you that when there's unrest in the halls of power, there's opportunity for evil people to step in. And that's exactly what happened. The Idumean, Antipater, backed one of the brothers who was fighting, and he stirred the pot. And the palace was a powder keg. And I don't mind telling you that my family members, we were worried. And I heard stories about not knowing what tomorrow was going to bring. It seemed as though everybody was forced to take sides. Now, my father tried to stay out of the way, and he refused to support either faction. He just wanted to serve the throne. So Pompey in Rome heard about the unrest, and he took the opportunity to take control of the country. And so our leaders gave up sovereignty for peace. And they allowed Rome to set up a puppet ruler, and we, in essence, ceased to be a nation. It was humiliating enough to be controlled by a pagan nation, but to have the house of Herod as the king was too much. You see, Herod was a political lackey. After the assassination of Julius Caesar, who was Herod's father, Herod's father, Antipater, backed the treasonous Cassius and Brutus. And he showed his allegiance by stealing from the people in Jerusalem and in Judea and giving that money to Rome. Now, as you may imagine, the Romans loved him. And all was good until Antony defeated Brutus and Cassius. And when that happened, Antipater was in trouble. But Herod, his son, grabbed the chance and he began to suck up to Antony. And in fact, Antony was so impressed with the weasel that he made Herod the quote unquote king of the Jews. Now, Herod was Antony's man through and through until Antony was defeated by Octavian. And now we know that he lost the final battle in Egypt. And then somehow Herod found out about it. He heard the news before it reached Rome. And so, as an ally of Antony, he was now in serious danger. And he had only he only had one chance, one opportunity, and he grabbed it. He had to get to Rome before Octavian did, and then put the word out that he no longer supported Antony, but now he was supporting Octavian. And Herod became the biggest supporter of Octavian in the empire. And he was apparently a pretty good actor. And somehow Octavian didn't catch on to what just about everybody else in the Rome knew, that Herod was a backstabbing hack who would sell his own children for power. And so somehow he was able to gain Octavian's trust and stay in power. Now, Herod was never popular in Israel. He was the king of Judea, but the Jews hated him. Now, first of all, they hated him because he was only half Jewish, and there's nothing more humiliating than being ruled by a foreigner. In fact, a man from Idumea was even more of a slap in the face, because if you remember your Bible, the Idumeans came from Esau. Now, their homeland was known as Edom, and their father Esau, of the Jacob and Esau fame. And they always thought that they somehow got messed over by Jacob. And they felt that they should have gotten the land of Canaan, or what became the land of Israel, instead of the little outpost east of the Dead Sea, even though they were right on the King's Highway and they were making a boatload of money. They controlled a number of toll booths on the King's Highway, but they would have rather have had all the riches of the land of Canaan. And so the people of Edom and the people of Israel, they fought for centuries. In fact, the Jewish prophet Obadiah prophesied against them and foretold their final destruction. And somehow that caused some hard feelings, as you may imagine. And now they have a son of Edom ruling the nation of Israel. It was almost too much to take. Now, Herod knew that he had PR problems. And so he tried to buy the people by expanding the temple and building all sorts of buildings, including, of course, a huge palace for himself. And those who worked in the palace knew Herod, well, he was not playing with a full deck. In fact, we know that he murdered his favorite wife, and he killed two of his sons, and each was killed when he was the heir to the throne. And so Herod became more and more unstable and more paranoid as he got older. And it got to the point where the heir to the throne couldn't get life insurance. The premiums were just too high. Now, that's what's going on in the palace. But there was so much more going on in the world. Now, we knew the prophecies of Daniel, that God would and promised that he would raise up a king. Now, we knew the time was getting close because we could do the math. And so there was an air of expectation in the nation. And in fact, would-be messiahs were popping up all over the place. And Herod, as you may imagine, put them down quickly and harshly. Now, I didn't take any of these quote-unquote messiahs seriously because they didn't seem to fulfill the prophecies. They just seemed to be all about themselves. And then there came the census and the baby boy that was born in Bethlehem. Now, Herod had ears all over Judea, and we heard of some commotion in Bethlehem. It had something to do with the shepherds who said that they saw angels, and they were told to go and see this baby who was born in a barn, who was the promised Messiah. Now, everyone knows, of course, the shepherds can't be trusted, and so nobody in the palace took their words seriously. But the story they told was fascinating. Angels singing, proclaiming Messiah was born. Could this be? Could the wait of ages, of centuries, finally be over and Messiah is here? Well, I have to tell you that when I heard the story, when I heard about this, I was worried for this baby boy. Because once Herod got word of him, his life wouldn't be worth much. Whether he was the Messiah or not, Herod wouldn't care. If he thought him to be a rival, he would be one that needed to be taken out. And so no one took the shepherds seriously, and so it seemed the baby had a chance. And then came the Magi from Babylon. They were a group of stargazers, and they arrived at the palace looking for who they called the King of the Jews. Now, Herod called himself the King of the Jews. And so those of us who were watching around, we knew that this could not go well. Now, the Magi had a wonderful story to tell. It says that they were gazing at the sky, and they saw this bright star. And this star was somehow different from all of the other stars in the sky. And they believed this star marked the birth of a special baby, a king who would grow up to be a special king and one who would in fact change all of human history. And they learned from a very wise Jew who was the leader of the Magi 500 years before in the golden age of Babylon. And they had come to find this baby and worship him. So as you may imagine, Herod was livid. But remember, he was also a shrewd actor. So he played nice to the Magi in hopes of finding out who this rival was and where he could be found. And so he went and he studied the holy books. And he believed the baby, if the baby was in fact the king from God, that this king would be born in Bethlehem, the hometown of David. And so he told the Magi to go to Bethlehem and then report back to him so that he, Herod, could go and worship this baby king as well. And then Herod began to plot. Once he found out where this baby was, then he would end this threat once and for all. But the Magi didn't return. Somehow they didn't trust Herod. I mean, maybe they had heard about this, what a tyrant he was. I don't know. It doesn't say. We have no way of knowing. All we know is that they didn't trust him, and so they went back to Babylon a different way, and they bypassed the palace completely. Now, Herod was inconsolable. Herod wanted blood, and so he made a decree that all of the baby boys 2 years and younger would be slaughtered in and around Bethlehem. So as the soldiers went to put his evil decree into practice, I can remember praying that the God of Israel would somehow, some way protect this little baby boy. Then I went about my business. I have to confess that I thought very little about this little baby for years. Herod died and life went on. And then I saw him. Could 30 years have passed since the visit of the Magi? I saw this carpenter from Nazareth, who taught with an authority that I had never heard before. He told people to love God, to love people. And he said that leadership meant being a servant first. He healed the lame. He gave sight to the blind. And just by looking at him, I knew that he was special. And then I heard the rumors. The rumors that this Jesus was the son of David, that he was in fact born in Bethlehem during the days of the census, and that he had escaped the rage of Herod by a dream that was given to his father. And so he escaped into Egypt and he lived there until after Herod died. In fact, they say that his family was supported by the very gifts that the stargazers gave him, the stargazers from Babylon, those magi that came to the palace gates. And I remembered the stories that the shepherds told the angels, who first told them to go to Bethlehem to find this child, that they would find a baby wrapped in swaddling clothes and laying in a manger, and that this child was the Messiah. And now it all made sense. The Messiah had come. In fact, I still think back on those events with sadness. For you see, Herod didn't need to kill all of those babies, because Jesus didn't come to take his throne. He came to establish his kingdom in the hearts and lives of people. And I am proud to tell you that I was there at the beginning. And I am still here. In fact, I've served the house of Herod faithfully. But my true alliance and my true allegiance belongs to the baby that Herod attempted to kill. This baby grew up, he lived, he died, and 3 days later, he rose again. And so here I am, waiting for the promise that he will come again. And I got to tell you, folks, I can't wait. Did this actually happen? Probably not. But it could have. Could have. Because you see, Jesus's birth, this event that we call Christmas, was an event in history. And so there were all kinds of people that we will never know about who had to navigate all of the rumors, all of the things that were happening. And you can bet that there were people in the court of Herod who may have been thinking very much what we just talked about. And so I would pray that as you are getting ready for Advent, as you are thinking about Christmas coming, that you would remember that Jesus came to a lost world, and that the kingdom of the world was still attempting to stop what God was doing, but yet it was unable to do so. But in the kingdom of the world attempting to stop what God had done, they left in their wake nothing but death, destruction, and pain. That has not changed. But Jesus is still the one who conquered all. So I just pray that you would keep that in mind as you are spending this Christmas season with your family and friends. So I thank you for making it to the end today. I pray that you were encouraged by these words, and I look forward to seeing you again in a future video. God bless y'all.